Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, Mark Antony. Egypt's queen of seduction and betrayal. History remembers many queens, but none shine brighter or darker than Cleopatra. To some, she was a brilliant ruler, a strategist, and the last true pharaoh of Egypt. To others, she was a seductress who used beauty, charm, and betrayal to manipulate the most powerful men of Rome. Between her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, Cleopatra's story became one of love, lust, politics, and ultimately, tragedy. Her name is forever linked with seduction and betrayal, not just of men, but of empires. This is the story of Cleopatra, Egypt's queen who dared to challenge Rome, not with armies alone, but with her mind, her passion, and her ability to turn love into a weapon of power. 1. The birth of a Queen. Cleopatra Theban Philopator was born in 69 BC in Alexandria, the jewel of Egypt. Her family, the Ptolemies, were not originally Egyptian. They were Greek descended from Ptolemy or I, a general of Alexander the Great. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt, but their rule was always shaky. They spoke Greek, not Egyptian, and often fought among themselves. Still, Egypt was rich, with fertile land, gold, and control of important trade routes. Cleopatra grew up in a palace filled with luxury, but also danger. In her world, family members killed each other for the throne. Betrayal was not rare, it was expected. From a young age, Cleopatra was different. While her siblings lived in comfort, Cleopatra studied. She learned philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and most importantly, languages. It is said she could speak at least 9, including Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, and even some African dialects. This made her unique, because most of her dynasty ignored the local Egyptian people. Cleopatra, however, connected with them by speaking their language and honoring their gods. This gave her a special power. She was not just a ruler from Greece, she was a true pharaoh in the eyes of her people. Her father, Ptolemy II, was weak and corrupt. Romans called him Auletes, meaning the flute player, mocking him for his love of music more than politics. He often bribed Roman leaders to keep his throne safe. Cleopatra, watching from the shadows, understood a harsh truth. Egypt's survival now depended on Rome. If she wanted to rule, she would need to master not only Egypt, but also the dangerous world of Roman politics. When Cleopatra was about 18, her father died. According to Egyptian custom, she was forced to marry her younger brother, Ptolemy III, who was only around 10 years old. Though the marriage was symbolic, it meant Cleopatra could not rule alone. But Cleopatra had no intention of being a puppet. She tried to rule as the sole leader, printing her face on coins and issuing orders without mentioning her brother. This angered her advisors and her brother's guardians. Soon, Cleopatra was driven out of Alexandria. Exiled in the desert, her throne stolen by a boy, Cleopatra did not surrender. Instead, she began plotting her return, waiting for the perfect ally to arrive. That ally was none other than Julius Caesar, Rome's most powerful man. 2. The struggle for the throne. When Cleopatra's father Ptolemy II died in 51 BC, the throne passed to his daughter Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy III, who was just a boy of 10. According to Egyptian custom, they were married to rule as king and queen together, but in reality, it was Cleopatra who carried the burden of leadership. She was strong-willed, intelligent, and determined to establish herself as Egypt's true ruler. She placed her image on coins, issued royal decrees in her own name, and acted as if she were the sole pharaoh. This defiance angered the advisors, who controlled her young brother. Soon, conflict erupted in Alexandria. Cleopatra found herself betrayed by the very guardians who once served her father. Forced out of the palace, she was stripped of power, and exiled into the deserts of Syria. Most rulers would have accepted defeat, but Cleopatra was not ordinary. She knew Egypt could not survive without a strong leader. She also knew Rome was the rising giant that could make or break kingdoms. If she could win the support of the right Roman general, she would return stronger than ever. And so, in exile, she waited, gathering a small army, watching the horizon for an opportunity. That opportunity came in 48 BC, when Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, arrived in Alexandria. Cleopatra meets Julius Caesar. Caesar did not come to Egypt for Cleopatra. He came chasing Pompey, his great rival in the Roman Civil War. Pompey had fled to Egypt seeking refuge, but instead of protecting him, young Ptolemy III's advisors betrayed Pompey. They killed him and presented his severed head to Caesar as a gift. But Caesar was not pleased. He saw it as cowardice and dishonor. With Pompey dead, Caesar remained in Alexandria. And soon the city became a stage for a new drama. Cleopatra, still in exile, realized her moment had come. If she could win Caesar to her side, she could reclaim her throne. But the palace was guarded, and her enemies watched every door. She needed a daring plan. That plan would become one of the most famous stories in history. Late at night, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers, rolled up inside a carpet, or some say, inside a linen sack. When the bundle was unrolled before the Roman general, out came Cleopatra, dressed in her finest clothes, her eyes shining with confidence and charm. She was only 21, but her presence captivated the 52-year-old Caesar. History would forever remember this scene as the beginning of one of the most legendary love affairs of all time. Cleopatra knew what she was doing. She needed Caesar's protection, and she offered not only her loyalty but her beauty, intelligence, and the promise of Egypt's wealth. Caesar, tired of the endless betrayals of Rome, found in her something exotic and fascinating. Together, they formed not just a romance but a political alliance. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria. War broke out between her followers and the forces of her brother Ptolemy XIII. After fierce fighting, Ptolemy drowned in the Nile, and Cleopatra was restored as Queen of Egypt. She was no longer a fugitive. She was now pharaoh, standing proudly beside the most powerful man in the world. 4. Love and politics. With her throne secured by Caesar's army, Cleopatra entered into a new phase of her reign, one where love and politics blended into a dangerous mixture. Caesar stayed in Egypt longer than most Romans expected, nearly a year, and during this time his relationship with Cleopatra deepened. She was more than a young queen. She was educated, witty, and unafraid to challenge the Roman general with clever conversation. Caesar, hardened by decades of war and betrayal, found her company refreshing. For Cleopatra, the relationship was not only personal but political. She knew Rome held the destiny of Egypt in its hands. By binding herself to Caesar, she tied Egypt's survival to the most powerful man alive. In 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Ptolemy Ifkim Caesar, but the people called him Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. Whether Caesar ever officially recognized him is debated, but Cleopatra proclaimed loudly that her child was the son of Julius Caesar. In her eyes, Caesarion was not just her heir, but the living bond between Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra and Caesar traveled together along the Nile, displaying their power, and she showed him the wealth and glory of her land. To the Egyptians, Cleopatra was not just their queen, she was the goddess Isis reborn, and by her side stood the greatest Roman of his time. But in Rome, whispers began to grow. The Senate feared Caesar's ambition, and Cleopatra's presence only made it worse. A foreign queen, flaunting her relationship with their general, bearing his child, threatened the pride of Rome. They called her manipulative, a seductress who had enchanted Caesar. Yet Caesar was unstoppable. He returned to Rome and invited Cleopatra to visit him, which she did in 46 BC. She lived openly in his villa, bringing scandal to the city. Senators grumbled as Cleopatra walked proudly through Rome, her son in her arms, dressed as a goddess. The people murmured, was Caesar planning to make himself king and Cleopatra his queen? Such fears grew like fire until in 44 BC, that fire exploded into blood. Betrayal and assassination on the Ides of March, 44 BC, Julius Caesar entered the Senate house. He had been warned by omens and soothsayers, but he ignored them. Cleopatra, still in Rome, had no idea that history was about to shatter her world. The senators who once bowed to Caesar now turned on him. One by one, they stabbed him, 23 blows falling upon the man who had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, and ruled the world. Among them was Brutus, whom Caesar loved like a son. With his dying breath, Caesar fell at the feet of Pompey's statue, his blood pooling on the floor. Rome was in chaos. Cleopatra's protector, lover, and the father of her child was gone. She was a foreign queen in a city that now hated her more than ever. Without Caesar, her position was fragile. She feared for her life and for her son. Many in Rome wanted her dead, for they saw in her not just a widow of Caesar, but a threat to Roman authority. Cleopatra fled Rome quietly, returning to Egypt with Caesarion. She had lost the man who lifted her from exile, but she had not lost her will. She still had her throne, her child, and her ambition. But now she faced a dangerous world where Caesar's assassins battled his allies for control of Rome. It was a world where loyalty shifted like sand, where betrayal was the only currency, and where Cleopatra would need to use every weapon at her disposal, her beauty, her cunning, her wealth, to survive. Rome had taken Caesar from her, but in the years to come, she would find another Roman leader to bind herself to, a man whose passion and downfall would forever tie his fate to hers, Mark Antony. 6. Cleopatra and Mark Antony. After Caesar's assassination, Rome was thrown into chaos. The city was divided among Caesar's allies and enemies, and Cleopatra's position in Egypt was delicate. She needed a new protector, a Roman leader strong enough to secure her throne and maintain Egypt's independence. That man was Mark Antony, one of the 3 members of the new Roman triumvirate. Antony, known for his military skill and boldness, was stationed in the eastern provinces of Rome, including Asia Minor. Cleopatra understood the stakes. In 41 BC, she sailed to Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey, arriving in a spectacular display that would become legendary. She appeared on a royal barge, dressed as the goddess Isis, adorned with gold, purple, and jewels. The boat floated down the river, flanked by attendants, music, and incense. Antony was captivated at first sight. Cleopatra's beauty was undeniable, but it was her confidence, intelligence, and aura of power that mesmerized him. Their meeting was both personal and political. Cleopatra needed Antony's support against her enemies at home, while Antony saw in her the wealth, resources, and influence that could strengthen his position in Rome. Their alliance quickly became intimate, blending romance with politics. Cleopatra's charm was a weapon, and Antony fell completely under its spell. 7. The queen and the general Cleopatra's influence over Antony grew as their relationship deepened. They traveled together, amassed armies, and ruled territories from Alexandria to the eastern Mediterranean. Antony granted her cities, wealth, and power, elevating her far above any mere queen consort. Yet in Rome, whispers of scandal grew louder. Antony had a Roman wife, Octavia, sister of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, whom he had abandoned for Cleopatra. The Roman people and Senate saw this as both betrayal and humiliation. Antony was no longer just a general. He was now Cleopatra's ally, her partner, her lover, and Rome considered him a traitor to their nation. In Alexandria, and Cleopatra presented themselves as co-rulers of the East. Cleopatra gave birth to twins, further cementing their union. Yet, every act of their love was also a political statement, a challenge to Rome, a demonstration that Cleopatra's Egypt could rival the might of the empire itself. The propaganda war began even before open conflict. Octavian used Antony's devotion to Cleopatra to portray him as weak, corrupted by foreign influence, and unfit to rule Rome. Letters, speeches, and rumors painted Cleopatra as the ultimate seductress, a woman who betrayed a Roman leader and plotted to seize power over the empire. In the midst of this, Antony remained under her spell, torn between his love for Cleopatra and his loyalty to Rome. Their passion was real, but the world around them saw it as dangerous and treacherous. Antony and Cleopatra's alliance would soon lead to war, betrayal, and the final act of their dramatic lives. 8. Betrayal of Rome. As Antony's love for Cleopatra grew, so did the political storm in Rome. Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son and heir, saw an opportunity to turn public opinion against Antony. He portrayed Antony as a man corrupted by a foreign queen who had abandoned his Roman wife Octavia for Egypt's seductive ruler. Octavian spread rumors that Antony intended to make Cleopatra the Queen of Rome, undermining the traditions and honor of the Republic. Antony, blinded by passion, openly favored Cleopatra and her children over Rome, giving her gifts of territories, wealth, and military power. These actions, meant to strengthen their alliance, only fueled Rome's outrage. Senators and citizens alike feared that Antony had betrayed Rome's interests for his love, aligning himself with a foreign queen instead of the empire he was sworn to protect. Cleopatra, ever aware of propaganda, embraced her role. She used her intelligence, charm, and political acumen to influence Antony's decisions. Together, they positioned themselves as rulers of a new Eastern Empire, a vision that threatened Rome's balance of power, but love and ambition could not overcome the tide of war that was coming. 9. The final war. By 31 BC, tensions erupted into full-scale war. Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces faced Octavian at the Battle of Actium, a naval confrontation off the coast of Greece. Antony commanded his fleet with courage. Cleopatra guided her Egyptian ships, and the Allied forces initially held their ground. But chaos and miscommunication spread through the battle. Cleopatra, fearing the worst, retreated with her fleet, leaving Antony exposed and vulnerable. Seeing her departure, Antony's morale collapsed, and he too fled. Octavian's forces pursued them relentlessly. The retreat marked the beginning of the end for Antony and Cleopatra. The dream of an Eastern Empire ruled by Cleopatra and Antony crumbled in front of their eyes. Cities fell, armies surrendered, and their influence vanished. Their alliance, once a symbol of power and passion, had become a story of betrayal and ruin. The political, military, and romantic gamble had failed. 10. Death of Antony and Cleopatra. After their defeat, Antony returns to Alexandria, defeated and humiliated. Cleopatra attempted to negotiate with Octavian to preserve her throne and her children, but Octavian had no intention of granting mercy. Believing Cleopatra had betrayed him, Antony fell into despair. Misled by false news of Cleopatra's death, he took his own life with a sword. Cleopatra, discovering Antony dead, faced the inevitability of her own fate. She refused to be paraded in Rome as a conquered queen. According to legend, she allowed a poisonous asp to bite her, ending her life in the palace where she had ruled with intelligence, cunning, and beauty. Others claim she used poison instead, but the story of the serpent became immortal. Cleopatra's death in 30 BC marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the final independence of Egypt. Rome absorbed Egypt into its empire, and Octavian rose as Augustus, the first Roman emperor, yet Cleopatra's legacy endured. She was remembered not just for her beauty or her romances, but for her strategic mind, her ability to wield power in a man's world, and the dramatic blend of love and betrayal that defined her life. Through her story, history learned that intelligence, ambition, and passion could challenge the mightiest empire on earth, even if only for a moment. Cleopatra became a symbol, an eternal queen whose allure, cunning, and daring would echo through the centuries.